the man who survived two atomic bombs. It's just after 8 o'clock in the morning on August 6th, 1945. A thin, bespectacled engineer walks along a dusty road on the edge of Hiroshima. His name is Tsutomu Yamaguchi. He's 30 years old. He is thinking about going home. For 3 months, he's been here on a work assignment, far from his wife and baby son in Nagasaki. Today is supposed to be his last day. He carries a lunchbox in one hand, a rolled blueprint in the other. The war has been going badly for Japan, but here in Hiroshima, the morning feels almost peaceful. And then he hears it, a distant, droning engine, higher than usual. He looks up. Against a pure blue sky, a single silver plane glides in. A B-29. He watches it with the casual curiosity of a man who has stood through 100 air raid drills. No sirens. No bombs falling. Just a plane, and then something odd falling from its belly. A small object descending on a parachute. He squints, and in that instant, the sky turns white. Not bright, not sunny, white. A blinding flash that erases shadows, color, the ground beneath his feet. For a fraction of a second, the world becomes a sheet of hot light. Tsutomu feels his body lifted and thrown sideways, as if a giant invisible hand has swatted him off the road. He hears himself scream, but cannot hear his own voice. Then, nothing. When he wakes up, he's lying in a field. His face, arms, and the left side of his body are burned. His eardrums have ruptured. The city he was just walking toward is now a towering black cloud, blooming into the sky like some slow, poisonous flower. He has just survived the first atomic bomb ever used on a city. He does not know that word yet, atomic. He only knows that Hiroshima is gone. He will spend the night in the ruins. He will bandage himself as best he can. And the next morning, he will make a decision that sounds impossible in hindsight. He will go home to Nagasaki. He will believe that by leaving Hiroshima, he has escaped the worst of the war. 3 days later, at 11:02 a.m., he will be in a meeting room, telling his boss in Nagasaki what he saw in Hiroshima. His boss will say, "One bomb can't destroy an entire city. You must be mistaken." At that exact moment, the room will fill with a second white flash. And Tsutomu Yamaguchi, the man who survived one atomic bomb, will survive another. This is his story. Welcome to Night History for Sleep, where we walk slowly and quietly through the strangest and darkest corners of the past. Tonight, we're not talking about a battle or a king, but about one ordinary man whose life intersected twice with the most destructive weapon humans had ever built. This episode will mention war, mass death, and the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I won't use graphic detail, but the reality behind this story is heavy. If you like long, calm, human stories, true stories, told slowly enough to fall asleep to, but clearly enough to remember in the morning, you can subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss the next one. Now, let's go back. Before the flash, before the mushroom clouds, to a boy growing up in a country racing toward disaster, with no idea that history will remember him as the man who survived two sons. Tsutomu Yamaguchi was born in 1916 in Nagasaki. Nagasaki is a port city surrounded by hills, with a long history as one of Japan's windows to the outside world. Foreign ships, foreign goods, foreign ideas. Nagasaki had seen them all. When Tsutomu was a boy, Japan was changing fast. The country had defeated Russia in war. It had factories, ships, armies. People talked about empire, destiny, greatness. He was not a general. He was not a politician. He was a quiet, studious child who loved drawing and design. He grew up, went to technical school, and became a naval engineer. Japan, hungry for resources, needed ships, oil tankers especially, to feed its war machine. Tsutomu got a job with Mitsubishi Heavy Industries in their shipbuilding division. This, in another world, would have been the story. A young engineer helping to design merchant ships. A steady job. A modest life with his wife, Hisako, and their baby son. But by his late 20s, Japan was no longer just an island nation. It was deep in the quagmire of World War II. American bombers had started to appear in the skies. Cities burned at night, Tokyo, Osaka, Kobe, under curtains of incendiary bombs. In 1945, as the war dragged into its fourth year for Japan, food was scarce. Blackout curtains hung over every window. Air raid drills broke up daily life. Tsutomu, like millions of other Japanese civilians, was caught in the middle. He worked. He stood in ration lines. He tried to be a good husband and father under conditions that were slowly strangling ordinary life. In the summer of 1945, Mitsubishi sent him away from Nagasaki on a 3-month business trip. Hiroshima. His task: help design and inspect a new oil tanker at a shipyard there. He didn't want to go. It meant leaving Hisako and their little boy behind. But in wartime, you don't negotiate with orders. He left Nagasaki for Hiroshima. As he said goodbye, he must have thought, like many traveling fathers, that he would be back before his son had grown too much. Back before the war changed anything too drastically. He could not know that the war was about to reach for him in a way that no one, anywhere in the world, had ever experienced. Hiroshima in the summer of 1945 was, in some ways, an ordinary Japanese city. Yes, there were soldiers. Yes, there were air raid drills. But compared to firebombed cities like Tokyo, Hiroshima still had wooden houses standing, streetcars running, people biking to work and school. There were rumors, of course. People noticed that Hiroshima and Nagasaki had been strangely spared the worst of the conventional bombing raids. Some whispered that the Americans were saving these cities for something. No one knew what. So Tsutomu spent his days at the shipyard, supervising the construction of a new tanker. Hot, noisy work among steel plates and rivets. He lived in a dormitory, missed his family, and counted down the days until he could go home. By August 6th, his 3 months were over. His bags were packed. His mind was already in Nagasaki. On that morning, he woke up, dressed in his work clothes, and walked toward the shipyard one last time to resolve a design issue before catching his train home. At 8:15 a.m., he was about 3 kilometers from the city center. Above him, the American B-29 Enola Gay released a single bomb, codenamed Little Boy. It drifted down on a parachute. People looked up. They had seen bombs before, a flurry of black specks, whistling as they fell. But this was just one object, strangely slow. Then, a flash. Tsutomu would later describe it as like a great magnesium flare. For a moment, he saw the bones in his own hand, lit from the inside, as if he had become an X-ray of himself. He had time to think. Asterisk, this is it. I'm gonna die. Asterisk. The blast wave hit. The air around him turned solid. He was lifted off his feet and thrown into a nearby irrigated potato field. The force tore off his clothes. His face and arms were burned. His eardrums burst. When he regained consciousness, everything was wrong. The blue of the morning sky was now dominated by a towering column of smoke, boiling upward into a mushroom shape. The city he had been walking toward was obscured behind it. His immediate world was a tangle of flattened structures, dust, and a strange silence after the roar. His skin hurt with a deep, hot pain. The side of his face felt raw. He pressed his fingers against his ears and felt warmth, blood trickling from both. He staggered to his feet. Somehow he could still walk. He wrapped himself in what remained of his clothing and stumbled back toward the shipyard, which was slightly shielded by a hillside. There he found survivors, dazed, burned, bleeding. The shipyard had been damaged, but not erased. His colleagues looked at him in disbelief. Yama Gucci-san, what happened to you? He tried to explain, but his voice reached him only as a distant, muffled echo, like shouting underwater. They've bandaged his burns as best they could, and he spent the day and night in an air raid shelter, listening to the city outside burn. Imagine that night. Smoke seeping into the shelter. Distant screams. No one really knowing what had happened. No one had words like radiation or nuclear fission ready on their tongues. They only knew that a single blast had done what entire bomber squadrons couldn't. The world outside had turned to charcoal and ash in a heartbeat. In that cramped, dark shelter, Tsutomu must have thought he was lucky to be alive. He had seen death, felt it on his skin, heard it in his ears, and somehow he was still breathing. He also knew one more thing. His family was not here. His wife and child were in Nagasaki, hundreds of kilometers away. Hundreds of kilometers away. If he could get out of Hiroshima, maybe this nightmare would shrink to one chapter of his life. The next morning, August 7th, Hiroshima was a landscape from another planet. Buildings flattened, trees stripped, people wandering like ghosts, skin peeling, clothes burned away, calling for water that might kill them. Tsutomu needed to leave. Despite his burns, he was determined to get home. He made his way through the ruins to the train station. Trains were still running. That fact alone tells you how strange and stubborn wartime logistics were. Even with the city half erased, the machinery of empire kept trying to move. At the station, he saw things he would struggle to describe for the rest of his life. People on the platform with their hair burned off, faces swollen beyond recognition. Some had their arms stretched out in front of them, skin hanging in strips from their fingertips. He boarded a crowded train, bandaged and disoriented. As the train pulled away from Hiroshima, he looked back at the city, or what remained of it, a flattened, smoking basin with a column of dust still hanging above it. He was leaving hell behind. The train ride to Nagasaki took hours. He was in pain the entire way, his burns throbbing, ears ringing with an endless high-pitched whine. Other passengers stared at him. Everyone in Japan, by then, had seen the terrible results of conventional bombings. But this, one bomb, one city, felt different, even if they didn't yet understand how. He arrived in Nagasaki on August 8th. The familiar hills, the harbor, the cramped streets, they were all still there, intact. Life in Nagasaki still looked normal for wartime. He must have felt a wave of unreality. How could the world be this unchanged here, after what he had just seen? He went straight to a doctor who rebandaged his burns and told him to rest. Then he went home. His wife, Hisako, and their baby son, Katsutoshi, saw him bandaged from head to. He thought he had left it behind. The second worst day was tomorrow. The morning of August 9th, 1945, began quietly in Nagasaki. There had been an air raid alarm earlier, but it was lifted. People went about their business. Tsutomu woke up in pain but determined. In a decision that would seem almost absurd in hindsight, he went to work. He believed that even in war, even after Hiroshima, duty mattered. Perhaps he also needed to see his colleagues, to anchor himself in routine after what he'd witnessed. At the Mitsubishi office in Nagasaki, he walked into his section chief's room, his body wrapped in bandages. The chief looked at him. "What on earth happened to you?" Tsutomu told him, "I was in Hiroshima. One bomb destroyed the entire city." He described the flash, the blast, the mushroom cloud. His boss frowned, skeptical. "One bomb cannot destroy an entire city," he said. "You must be confused." Even at that late stage of the war, the idea was too big, too strange to accept. Tsutomu opened his mouth to insist, to say, "I saw it." At that exact moment, the room filled with a white light. It was 11:02 a.m. American B-29 Boxcar had just dropped a second atomic bomb, codenamed Fat Man, over Nagasaki. Tsutomu still ringing from Hiroshima and now Nagasaki. His bandages were torn. His burns had reopened. Broken glass cut his skin. But he was alive. Again. Around him, Nagasaki was in chaos. The topography of the city, the hills and valleys, meant the destruction pattern was different from Hiroshima's flatter landscape. Some neighborhoods were spared. Others were erased. From where he stood, he could see a column of smoke rising from the Urakami Valley, where the bomb had detonated. His first thought was not of the war. It was of his wife and child. Their house was roughly 3 kilometers from the hypocenter, in a part of the city that had taken heavy damage. He ran. Burned, bandaged, bleeding, he ran through streets filled with dust and screams. He saw houses flattened, fires beginning, people stumbling with burns he recognized all too well from 3 days earlier. Nagasaki was, in some parts, a mirror of Hiroshima. In others, it was strangely intact. That contrast would define the city's memory for decades. When he finally reached the spot where his home should be, he braced himself for a crater and found something else. The house was damaged but standing. The blast had shattered windows, blown in doors, ripped off parts of the roof. But the structure remained. His wife and child were alive. Hisako had taken their son out of the house earlier that morning to search for ointment for Tsutomu's burns. They had been caught outside in the black rain that fell after the blast, radioactive soot and water falling from the boiled sky. That rain would follow them the rest of their lives, though they didn't know it yet. For now, the only thing that mattered was that they were all still together. Not many people in history have ever had the experience of thinking they had left hell behind, only to have it find them again in a new city 3 days later. Tsutomu Yamaguchi had. He had looked into the heart of the first man-made sun, and then, staggeringly, found himself on the edge of a second. He was 30 years old. The rest of his life would be spent in the long, complicated shadow of those two flashes. Surviving an atomic blast is not the end of the story. It's the beginning of another one. In the weeks after the bombings, Tsutomu's body began to fail in ways that had nothing to do with visible burns. He developed a high fever. His hair started to fall out in clumps. Purple spots appeared on his skin. These were classic signs of acute radiation sickness, though the term didn't exist in everyday language yet. Doctors did what they could with limited supplies. For months, he lay in bed, drifting in and out of consciousness, his body waging a war at the cellular level. He later recalled hearing, through a fever haze, that the war had ended. On August 15th, Emperor Hirohito's voice came crackling over the radio, announcing Japan's surrender in archaic, formal language. "I have resolved to pave the way for a grand peace," he said. For people like Tsutomu, lying in pain in flattened cities, the peace he described felt distant, abstract. The war was over, but its fallout, literal and emotional, was just beginning. Tsutomu eventually recovered enough to walk, to work, to function. He was lucky. Many did not. In Hiroshima and Nagasaki, thousands died in the days and weeks after the blasts, not from the initial explosion, but from burn infections, radiation poisoning, and long-term illnesses. The survivors, hibakusha, as they came to be called, faced another problem: stigma. People were afraid of them, afraid they were contagious, afraid that marrying them would mean sick children, afraid that hiring them would bring medical costs. In that social climate, many hibakusha chose silence. Tsutomu was one of them. For years, he rarely spoke about what had happened, even to colleagues. He went back to work at Mitsubishi. He tried to give his family a stable life. He and Hisako had more children, 2 daughters. The family carried their scars quietly, but the bombs left marks that did not fade. Hisako, who had been caught in the black rain, would later develop leukemia and other cancers. Their son, Katsutoshi, suffered health issues and died relatively young, in his late 30s. Tsutomu himself lived with damaged hearing, chronic pain, and the psychological weight of being a double survivor. Imagine what sleep must have been like for him. The dreams, the flashes, the feeling, perhaps, that at any moment the sky could open again. Yet on the surface, he was simply a modest, middle-aged man in post-war Japan. He worked. He raised children. He took trains. He aged. The world around him changed at dizzying speed. Japan rebuilt its cities.